Hi, I'm Catherine Sentigar. I'm going to be presenting on personnel selection and placement for Psych. I'm going to initially go over testing just a little tiny bit because it's tomorrow's lecture, so I don't want to step on anybody's toes. So the book defines a test as a systematic procedure for observing behavior and describing it with the aid of numerical scales or fixed categories. It allows the formation of selection batteries, which are predictors, to assess potential employees' performance and success. A few types of tests, these are not all of them, are cognitive ability tests. These are kind of like IQ tests, Wonderlic tests that was used for soldier placement, things like that. Psychomotor tests are like hearing tests. They want to know how you are and how you interact with stimuli, how you interact with particular environment. Personality tests, like the Big Five model, like the OCEAN acronym, have you assess your personality, your interpersonal skills, your communication, how open you are to adapting to new technology, things like that. But there's a problem with this in that people can easily falsify their answers to get a leg up on the competition because they know what the employer is looking for. So they can say, oh, I am very agreeable, and they're just not at all. Okay, and there are plenty of other tests that will be gone over in other podcasts. Okay, so before an organization selects an employee, they've got to recruit potential employees. So what they want to do is, weed out people who aren't qualified. If they want someone who has a bachelor's degree in engineering, they'll make sure to weed out people who just don't at all. Okay, traditionally, companies have used these methods of recruitment. They've used college placement offices. Like, for instance, we have the CDC here at Binghamton. You can go there, you can find out information about internships. You can find out if there are any positions around here that are open for when you graduate, things like that. Newspaper ads, which we see all the time, the classifieds in that section of the newspaper that are just tiny little snippets of information. Employee referrals, you could be referred to work for a particular company, maybe by someone who works there, maybe by a professor, an acquaintance. Job fairs. Job fairs are obviously where you go in with a stack of your resumes and hand them out to potential employers. To see if any of their jobs interest you. You might have an initial interview with them, or you set up an interview that way. Recently, organizations are more concerned with creating an enticing image for their organization. There's now what's called a perceived person environment fit. An applicant will apply if they believe that the work that they will be doing with this company will bring them pride and fit in with their morals, fit in with their values. You wouldn't want to work for a company that didn't present itself to, fitting in with your lifestyle. For instance, if you are, a very charitable person, you're more likely to work for, say, some place like the Red Cross or something, than you are to work for an organization owned by Donald Trump. So what they want to do is, what companies want to do so that they can recruit, is to come up with not an image, I guess, that would make you want to apply for them if you were that type of person. On the internet, obviously, there are sites like hotjobs.com, careerfinder.com, even Craigslist, there are tons of them. We all know them. We all looked on them for summer work. But, you know, you just type in your location, type in what you're interested in, and it spits out a bunch of results for you, and you can go from there. Or the business can create maybe a recruiting area on their own website that's you know, attractive to the people applying for it. And post job openings, things like that, requirements, specifications, things like that you need. Informal communication is a spread of information via those within the office or outside parties, from personal connections, networking, things like that. You know, if you have a friend whose dad is a CEO of a company and you want to work for them, you know, kind of give them a little hint so you can kind of have a little in with them. The problem with this is that it can easily lead to discrimination because people often associate with other people who are like them. So you would want to watch out for that. Make sure there's diversity in the workplace. Okay. So there are things called assessment centers, where people who are high in position will take the applicant pool and assess whether or not they will be good employees for their company. It's kind of after they've weeded out the ones that they don't want. And they take about 2 to 3 days to interview and use predictors, their predictor scores, to assess whether or not they'll fit into the company. Some methods used are an in-basket, where one person is given a situation that could potentially happen in the workplace that they're applying to, and they're given a specific amount of time, like a few hours, to come up with a solution for the situation, how they would handle it, how they would communicate to the other employees, problems, things like that. And then based on their answer, they come back, they talk to the assessor. Based on their answer, they are scored. A leaderless approach is where there's like 5 to 6 people in a group, and they are given a situation as well. And no one's assigned any position, no one's assigned a leader, anything like that. And based on how they work within the group, they are assessed to see how they will potentially work with the current employees. So they're assessed on their aggression, persuasiveness, interpersonal skills, and communication skills. Assessors also can use biographical information, because their behavior in past positions can be indicative of their behavior within the current area of work. Application blanks, you fill out an application, that's where they get their information. Biodata, you fill in an application using most likely in a Likert scale to assess your own personal history. Okay, so then they're going to set up interviews with potential employees. There's structured and there's unstructured. Structured, you're going to have a person reading off some questions to you. You respond, you go back and forth that way. Unstructured is where there's more experienced person giving your interview, and they're assessing you based on a more conversational approach. In terms of selection, there are a few methods to this. Multiple cutoff is when you have a score on predictors and you have a score on your interview and your assessment, and you've got to meet the baseline score. They create a baseline score, and you've got to go through that to kind of be hired. Multiple hurdle is the same, except for it's kind of like you've got to reach one level before you can reach the next level. So you've got to do well on the predictor, you've got to do well on your test, and then you move on to the assessment or the interview, and then you have to do well on those to move on to the next thing, like hurdles and jump over. Multiple regression is a statistical test using validation data and predictor scores to create a regression pattern that you can apply their scores to, and then inputting that information and you can rank them. So where are all these numbers coming from? Okay, test validation, that's where they're coming from. So there's predictive validation, which there's 4 steps involved in this one. You're going to want to gather the information on the applicants and create a score for their predictors. So with this score, then you'll hire some of them, fill the available positions, tell whether or not they're a good fit. After several months, you'll gather performance data to serve as criteria. So then you'll create a score for that. Then you use the score from the predictive information, the score from the performance data, to compute a predictor coefficient using these scores, and that coefficient will now be used to see how well predictors estimate their performance. Concurrent validation is similar, except for they use existing employees instead of a new pool of potential employees. So you're going to use the information that they got from the test that they previously took before getting hired, and they're also going to use performance criteria data. And with that, they're going to compute a validity coefficient using that information, and then see how well in the future it'll work. There's a good table on page 167, figure 7.1 in the textbook that splits these two quite nicely. Okay, so the accuracy of the decision is really important, obviously, for the most successful organization, the most successful business. There's a nice figure on page 175, figure 7.2. In the book, it has a graph. And on the y-axis, it's a scale of failure and success. On the x-axis, it's a scale of whether or not you're going to reject or hire. And then it's divided into 4 quadrants, and you're going to place the scores within that quadrant. So if you have applicants that are obviously in the 3rd quadrant, they failed the criteria, so you're much less likely to hire them. So they're just gone. If your applicants that are in the 1st quadrant are going to be the ones that you are more likely to hire because they were successful on their interview, they were successful in their predictors, they were successful in their assessment, all of that. Check that chart out. It makes it really easy to understand. In conclusion, companies are going to use the most cost and time efficient methods of doing all of this stuff, whatever fits best for what they need for their business. So, yeah. Thanks. I hope you have a good night. That was personnel selection and testing.